All right, you had homework. It was page 5. This homework was particularly useful because you have a quiz tomorrow. The quiz will be, I haven't made it yet, but it'll be 10-ish questions. So it might be a little less, might be a little more. It won't be more than 15 questions. It will not take the whole period, so we still will do new stuff tomorrow as well. But I really like this homework because these are Regents questions. Almost all of our homework, we will have real Regents questions, so you can get used to the way they write them. I think the people who write Regents questions are big old jerk faces. I would like to call them other things, but it would be inappropriate for a teacher to say what I really think of them to all of you. But you can fill in the blanks with whatever you think. I think they're jerks. I think they should ask a question. It shouldn't be confusing and it should be straightforward. And I personally think it should just get to whether you know the science or not. That makes sense to me. That is not how the Regents works. They like to throw in making them practically reading questions. A lot of these questions you have to read really carefully to make sure that they don't screw you up. And they do. They sometimes throw things in there because they know they're going to trick a bunch of kids. And I think that makes them jerk faces. But nobody cares except for maybe you guys what I think. And they keep hiring these jerk faces to answer or to write questions. The reason I say that is because even this first question proves what I'm talking about. So let me show you what I mean. So it says using a ruler to measure the length of a stick is an example of. Now they know their audience. They know they're talking to a bunch of 9th, 10th, or 11th graders. And they're human. So we often don't read all the words that are in front of us. If you were to only read the first word of everything in all those answers, would you have answered the question differently than you actually did? Because they expected you to say, okay, using a ruler to measure the length of a stick is an example of, it's not extending, it's not calculating, it is measuring. So they expected a bunch of kids who might be in a hurry to only read the first word. I do that all the time. I skim what I'm reading and don't pay full attention, and then I screw up. In this case, is answer 3 the correct answer? Do you use a ruler to measure the rate of change of the stick by making inferences? No, which makes no sense whatsoever. And if you actually read it, you wouldn't have picked it. But a lot of people would have just read the first word. So the reason I'm going through this is, and I may or may not have told you this already, I like to say the number 1 rule of earth science. Did I already tell you guys? There is one rule that I am going to have for every day in this class. And that rule is read all the words and do what they say. Because if you don't read all the words, you are going to miss something really important. So you are going to hear me say that over and over and over again this year. Read all the words and do what they say. So for this one, by the way, how I like to do multiple choice homework just to get an idea of what you know or don't know is could you hold up a 1, 2, 3, or 4 for what you picked as your answer? Don't worry about if you're right or wrong. I'm just kind of surveying my class. Looks like you guys got it. A ruler is extending the sense of sight using an instrument. Great job, everybody. The key to doing that is don't look around. I don't care who got what right. I just want to see how many of my students are getting it. The same person's getting stuff wrong. I want to address that. Or if everybody got it wrong, it was me, not you. So that's just a quick way for me to judge what you got going on. Number 2, which one of these can be performed most accurately using only the human senses? Again, 1, 2, 3, or 4, please. Everybody, it looks like got that right. It is counting 28 shells. Again, if you didn't read the whole sentence, you may have thought tearing sheets of paper into squares was done by the human senses, but the whole 1 centimeter, you can't do that without a ruler. Number 3, before I even address it, I would like to know what you guys picked as an answer. Okay, so I'm seeing some 2s, some 1s, some 3s. Anybody got 4 out there? Okay, nobody picked 4. Awesome. Before we keep going, did anybody read those 2 sentences right there? Or how about, did anybody skip those two sentences? Probably a few of you. How about we read those now? The map below shows the path of an ash cloud that resulted from Mount St. Helens volcanic eruption. The map was developed from satellite photographs. Then the question says, the path of the ash cloud was most probably determined by. Anybody want to change their answer? Yeah, it's 3 now. Why is this 3? Why is it an observation? You were given the information. You were given satellite photographs. A satellite photograph is an instrument. It extends your sense of sight, makes you be able to see what's going on up there in the atmosphere. If you had guessed that the answer was 2, an inference, I know what you were thinking, because first of all, you probably didn't read this, and you probably thought that this was a guess of where the ashes were going to go, or a guess of where they were, which makes sense, because doesn't this kind of remind you of like when they're on the news, when they're showing things about a hurricane? In fact, we have a hurricane that's hitting the United States relatively soon. They show a path of where the hurricane might go. And that looks a lot like this. I mean, it's usually coming from this direction. So that's why it's important to read that this came from photographs. All right, the rest I think are a little bit easier. You can just put it underneath it too, just use it as a magnet. Oh, okay. The interpretation based on an observation is called, what did you pick, 1, 2, 3, or 4? An interpretation based on an observation that is an inference. Number 5 is a good example of some of the questions you might see tomorrow. Which one of these is an inference for students who were at this lake? So it specifically says they were on a field trip to this large lake. They made these 4 statements. Which one's on inference? Let's see, 1, 2, 3, or 4, please. Yeah, it is 1. The lake was formed by glacial action. I did have some people pick 4. Again, they wouldn't have guessed that the lake was 18.5 degrees Celsius. They would have used an instrument, a thermometer, to say that that was the temperature. And finally, 6, a grouping of objects based on similar characteristics. That's called, that is by definition. Yeah, you guys got it. That's classification. And number 7 is actually just like the same question, just reworded. So that one's answer 3. How do you guys do? You good with it? Alrighty, I am happy with that. So if I can remember correctly, so just a reminder, you got a quiz on that stuff tomorrow. So I don't think you'll be overly complicated with that. If I remember correctly, we read the reading, right? About plants and graphs and bubbles and all that good stuff. We looked at the graph and I had you set up your graph paper. Is that where we ended up yesterday? Yeah. Great. I told you you didn't have to graph it for homework. Before we start graphing it though, let's take a look at these questions. There were 2 sets of variables. If you forgot, we were graphing depth and oxygen bubbles. Which one of these 2 was the dependent variable?
Or dependent was oxygen.
Yeah, I messed you up by asking about the dependent first. So which one you guys think? I heard a couple people. Yeah, this one is the number of bubbles. I'll accept a wide variety of how you explain that. How do you know the number of bubbles was the dependent variable? Okay, so one very scientific definition is that it's the one that depends on the depth. That's one way of explaining it. The number of bubbles change depending on the depth. Another way that I like to think about it is, well, I know the independent one is the one I can control. Can you control a number of bubbles? No, so that's another explanation, is you cannot control the number of bubbles. I would like you to write both of those. This is kind of like your notes. So if you do need a refresher on dependent variable, you can remember it's the one that depends on the independent or it's the one you cannot control. Which obviously leaves depth as the independent, and again, you can control depth. And again, you're controlling depth by deciding how deep you're going to go to take the measurements. Are you going 1 or 5 or 15 feet below the surface? Title. By definition, in the reading, the title needs to tell you what the graph is about. By reading the title, the reader should get an idea about the graph. It should be concise statement placed above the graph. Take a minute, look at the data, see what kind of, I'm seeing some hands. Does that mean you already got it, Raylan? That works. Anybody word it slightly different? Yours works, you can write that. Ethan, is that what you were gonna, you had your hand up, didn't you, Ethan? Evan? Sorry, Evan, not Ethan?
The impact of depth on small areas.
Say it again, I was too much focused on what your actual name was.
Huh?
Say your title again.
The impact of depth on number of oxygen.
That is very nice, very worded, probably more fancy than I would do, but work perfect. So just so you know what I would have put, which is very similar to everybody else's, I just would have put number of oxygen bubbles produced at different depths or varying depths. By the way, number of bubbles versus depth is not ideal. You might be good enough, but I want just a little bit more like full thought, not just this versus this. It's a little bit more of a sentence, I guess. We're gonna skip the averages for right now. We'll come back if we have time. Actually, no, let's do averages because my last class didn't have time because they had a huge fire drill in the middle. Do you guys know how to do averages? I asked for 3 averages: average depth, average oxygen bubbles for plant A, and average oxygen bubbles for plant B. Do you know how to do average?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna walk me through it. Add them up. So we're going to add this column.
Divide on how many
Yep, so you're gonna get your answer. So you're gonna take the sum and divide it by however many there are. So I guess I'll do it this way. Sum divided by, and there is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So add them up and divide by 7. I forgot, don't do math in here, don't do long math. Can I trust you to get out your phone and use your calculator? If you need an actual calculator, they're over under the blanket. See, this is actually one reason I like when you have your phone. I want to just show one mistake I saw people making earlier. So I put them all in my phone except for that last one. So now I'm gonna add 35. Before you hit the divide by, you do have to hit the equal. Otherwise, it's going to do that PEMDAS for you. And it would have just divided 35 divided by 7 and then added them. So you do have to hit the equal sign. Did everybody get this answer? Okay, and then divide by 7. Is that what you got? FYI, it'll always tell you what to round to. In science, though, I can guarantee you, unless they tell you otherwise, we're always going to go to the 10th place. Which one of these numbers is in the 10th place? The 4 is in the 10th place. So do I keep this as 18.4 or do I round it up to 18.5? Okay, right. This 2 tells me to keep the 4 the same. So this average is 18.4 for the depth. You guys can just keep your answers right there if you want, or if you want to put them on those lines, I don't care. How about you guys do the rest on your own? And I guess I better do an answer key, huh? What'd you get for number of bubbles for plant A? What's the average there? 26.7, everybody agree? And then how about for B? Okay, so let's double check. Did everybody, that was the number you got? And in this case, that 8, it has to round up, so you do have that 29.9. I did mention that in science this year, you don't have to memorize formulas because anytime you need to do math, the formula will be here, except for averages. Averages, I do kind of expect you to know how to do averages, so this was a refresher course in averages. If you got stuck doing these averages, we do need to make sure you're good with that by the end of the year, so if you need some help on that, it's your job to make sure you can tell me, how to do averages by the end of the year, if you don't already know. Okay? All right, so looking around, most of you did not graph because you didn't have to yesterday. Today, why don't you guys go ahead and do some graphing? Holly won't take you more than like 5-ish minutes. So go ahead and graph these up. If you did it already, you have a few minutes to yourself. So just take some time to plot those out. Oh, you know what? We didn't talk about what you went up by, did we? What did you go up by? 2? You went up by 5 for all of them or for just the x-axis? Okay, so how big is your graph then?
Decent size.
Is it going to be?
Yeah.
I'd like to see yours. Go for it. You graph in 5s. Everybody else did 2s? You did 5? That 5? Okay, 5 works. More than half the page then. I wasn't sure off the top of my head. So make sure these graphs take up more than half. So if you had gone by 10s, they would have been too small, but it looks like 5s work. So go ahead and graph those out. Make sure your graph would be ready to be handed in when you are done. So I know this requires a bunch of flipping back and forth. I'm sorry about that. You can rip it out if that makes it easier. I'm not sure if that does make it easier. Okay. I try to remember to put them on separate pages so you don't have to flip, but I must have got distracted with this one. Yeah, anytime we're doing a line graph, you're gonna always want lines. And I will also remind you that in science, it's almost always going to be a line graph unless they specifically tell you it's a bar graph. So they just start doing lines instead of bars or circles or anything. There shouldn't be any. Some classes might have to finish this graphing, but when you're done, just hold on. Yuppers. Hang on, I'll be right with you. Okay, sorry for that delay. First of all, how do you tell the difference between plant A and plant B?
One in pencil, one in pen.
One in pencil, one in pen. Circled one and one, I'm sorry, I cut you off. You what? Circled in triangles? So you use circles and triangles. I use blue and red ink. Do you just like randomly do that though? Like, how do you then know which one's which?
I also wrote plant A and plant.
Yeah, you need that key, otherwise known as a legend. So I am going to quickly make one. That one was for B for me, and the blue is for A, and this is what mine looked like. Now, I'm guessing yours all have the same shape, because that has to be true. But I heard some discussion. What were you guys over in this area talking about your graph looking slightly different. Went up by 5 on the y-axis. Do you mind, one of you have one I can put up here? You also have, but yours looks even different than London's. So here is a case of, see how different the graphs look? Now, is this graph wrong? No. Now, here's a case of it didn't take up more than half the page. So that is what's going on here. Why Riker's is different is now Riker claims he went up by 5, but Riker actually went up by 2.5. He only labeled every 5, but which is fine. So he labeled 5, 10, he skipped a line 15. So everyone, but if you go up by that, that technically means right here is 2.5, 5. Perfect. This is exactly right. This isn't wrong either, other than it takes up the whole, it doesn't take up half the page. But this is why having those rules in place, which one looks more dramatic, mine or London? Mine looks more dramatic. Now, this is why it is always important to read things and make your own conclusions on things. Because one thing that can happen is somebody who like really wanted to show the difference. So a lot of times in political parties, for example, if you really want to show a difference, you can graph information differently. So if I really wanted to say, hey, look at the difference, I'm going to show mine. But if I wanted that change to look less important, I'm going to use London's because mine's way more dramatic. London's kind of dismisses the difference a little. That's why reading and making your own opinions of things is important. So I know it kind of sounds like I'm getting political, but I'm not telling you who to vote for the record. I'm telling you to make sure with everything you do, you read what is actually going on and make your own conclusions. Because even though both these graphs are right, they portray a different thought or feeling when you look at them. Big change, not so much of a change. And that's why it's important how you graph. Neither one of these 3. And even Riker's is still a little different than mine, but also then showing way more of a change than London's did. Everybody's good, but it just shows the importance of how you graph makes a difference. So you guys good with graphing? All right, so we're going to then, I have a feeling, I'm just gonna test the waters here. We're actually going to stop here because the fire drill was my last class. And we're gonna see how my other classes do, kind of give me a judge of how fast or slow to go this year. So for today, we're gonna end here, quiz tomorrow. No homework tonight other than to study. Make sure you're prepared for that. Okay, so wait, I know a whole bunch of people don't study. I get that. A lot of you probably don't need to study or haven't had to study in the past. It might work for you again this year. But one thing I can guarantee you is if you move on to chemistry next year, studying will be required. It's just the nature of chemistry. Chemistry makes you think and it's a little bit more difficult. I would recommend getting used to reviewing this year so that it doesn't hit you like a load of bricks next year when you absolutely have to study. So how might I study for this? Since I know it's on just observation, inference, prediction, no graphing, no scientific notation, review for a couple minutes at least. One thing I might do is cover up the answers here on page 4. See if you can redo them. If you get them all right, you're probably good. Get used to questions that look like this because there will be some Regents questions on there. Definitely at least, oh, and the other thing I would do is make sure you know all the vocab on page 2. So know the difference between an observation and an inference and a prediction. So that's what I would do. I wouldn't spend more than 10 minutes probably, unless I really didn't know what I was doing. Just spend a few minutes reviewing that stuff so you're not completely lost when you get to the quiz tomorrow. All right, now that's it.